I still remember the chill that ran through me when the judge called my name that morning. Mrs. Crawford. Two simple words, but they felt like the crack of thunder before a storm I'd spent years pretending wasn't coming. My palms were damp against the polished wood of the defendant's table. Across the aisle sat Bradley, my husband of 5 years, smiling like a man who believed he'd already won. He looked confident, maybe even radiant. I'd seen that smile before. It was the same one he wore when he first kissed me at that Memphis conference, the same one that used to melt me. But now it only made my stomach turn. I kept my posture straight, chin lifted the way my grandmother had taught me. Never let them see you shake. But inside my heart was a wild thing slamming against my ribs as if it wanted to escape before this humiliation began. Bradley's lawyer started speaking in that rehearsed, falsely sympathetic tone lawyers use when they already smell victory. Your Honor, my client is entitled to half of all marital assets, including Mrs. Crawford's substantial inheritance. Inheritance. That word used to mean legacy, love, continuity. Now it felt like poison. My grandmother had spent 50 years building her small empire, a consulting firm that turned struggling family businesses into success stories. I grew up watching her sketch ideas on napkins, working late into the night with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. When she passed, I promised I would protect what she'd built. I didn't know the threat would come wearing a wedding ring. Bradley sat there in his designer suit my money had bought, that smirking as if this courtroom were his stage. Reporters leaned forward, notebooks ready, waiting for a scandal worth printing, and they'd get one. Just not the one Bradley expected. I glanced toward the judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled tight in a bun. Her name was Judge Richardson, and rumor said she'd seen it all: cheating husbands, bitter wives, families torn to pieces over dollars and pride. But something told me she hadn't seen this. She looked at me evenly. Mrs. Crawford, do you have any response to these claims? I stood. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Yes, Your Honor. I believe there's something the court needs to see. My fingers brushed the edge of my purse, a quiet reminder of the manila envelope waiting inside. I could almost feel the weight of it, like a heartbeat pulsing against my palm. But before I revealed it, before I changed everything, I wanted to tell you how I got here, because betrayal never happens in a single moment. It grows in silence. When I met Bradley, I was 40 and lonely, in a way success can't fix. I had Brightvale Analytics, a modest firm helping small companies find their footing. I had money but not love. My grandmother had died 3 years earlier, leaving a space in my life that nothing seemed to fill. Then he appeared, the charming sales manager, with easy laughter and eyes that saw only me in a crowded room. He told me I was brilliant. He made me laugh again. After months of business conferences and long-distance calls, I let him in. He proposed after 8 months on a riverboat under fairy lights. It was cinematic, ridiculous, and perfect. I remember crying, not just because I loved him, but because for the first time in years I felt chosen. My attorney, Patricia Holbrook, insisted on a prenuptial agreement. It's not romance, it's insurance, she said. I hesitated. I didn't want to insult Bradley. But when I brought it up, he laughed, took my hand, and said, Judith, I'm not marrying your bank account. I'm marrying you. He signed the papers without reading them. At the time, that felt like trust. Now I see it for what it was: arrogance. For a while, marriage felt like safety. We traveled, cooked together, shared inside jokes. Then my grandmother's estate came through the house, her investments, and $2.8 million. I remember telling Bradley the news over breakfast. He spilled his coffee, laughed, and said, Judith, we're rich. We. That tiny word was the first crack in the foundation. He quit his job within 6 months, claiming he wanted to support my career. He bought a luxury car for networking, invested in a friend's restaurant that failed spectacularly, and joined a golf club where he bragged about our money. Every time I questioned him, he'd say, Don't you trust me? And like a fool, I did, until I found the emails. He and his attorney had been planning the divorce for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. He'd researched Tennessee's laws and timed his move to maximize his payout. I remember staring at those emails on my laptop, my hands shaking so badly I could barely scroll. The words didn't feel real, my husband writing about my life as a business deal. I sat in the dark that night, the house silent except for the refrigerator's low hum, and I felt something inside me shift. I was done being the woman who apologized for her success. If Bradley wanted a fight, I'd give him one he couldn't win. That's how we ended up in this courtroom. Bradley's attorney had a briefcase stuffed with papers that looked important. He probably thought those documents were the weapons that would crush me. He didn't realize the real weapon fit inside a single envelope barely thicker than a letter. When the judge asked again if I had anything to add, I reached into my purse and handed the bailiff the envelope. He walked it to the bench, and the entire room seemed to lean forward as Judge Richardson broke the seal. Bradley frowned, leaning toward his lawyer. "What's that?" he whispered, but everyone heard him. His confidence flickered. For the first time since the trial began, he looked uncertain. "It's a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor," I said softly, "signed 5 years ago by both parties." The silence that followed was beautiful. I could almost hear the sound of Bradley's pride fracturing. His attorney leapt to his feet, shouting about unfair surprises. The judge cut him off with a look so sharp it could have drawn blood. "Sit down, Mr. Weston," she said. "I'll review the document." I watched Bradley's face as she read. His confidence melted slowly, first a twitch in his jaw, then a blink that lasted too long, then the color draining from his cheeks. For years, he'd imagined himself as the clever one in our marriage. But in that moment, I saw him realize he was outmatched. Judge Richardson looked up after several minutes. "This appears to be a properly executed agreement," she said. "Dated 6 weeks before your marriage, signed by both parties and witnessed by 2 notaries. Bradley's lawyer blanched. He had no idea what to say. "And Bradley, my husband, my betrayer," finally snapped. He jumped up, his voice cracking. "I don't remember signing anything like that." The judge didn't even look at him. "Mr. Crawford, you will sit down, or I will hold you in contempt." He sank back into his chair, like a child caught lying. And me? I just sat there breathing, feeling my pulse slow for the first time in months. All the fear I'd carried since the day I found those emails was evaporating right there on the courtroom floor. People asked me if it felt good to watch him fall. It didn't feel good. It felt right. I wasn't a villain taking revenge. I was a woman finally taking her power back. When the judge's gavel struck the bench, it sounded like the closing of a chapter I'd been trapped in for years. Bradley's lawyer tried to recover, mumbling something about misunderstandings and outdated paperwork, but his voice shook. Every syllable only made him sound smaller. Judge Richardson leaned back, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent light. "This document is valid and binding," she said firmly. "It states that all premarital and inherited assets remain the sole property of Mrs. Crawford. Furthermore, Mr. Crawford waived any right to future claims in the event of divorce." Her words hit him like stones. Bradley's face turned pale, that expensive tan of his evaporating in seconds. The courtroom, filled with whispers and camera shutters, fell silent again. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply breathed deeply, fully, for the first time in years. When the hearing adjourned, I stepped outside into the courtyard. The Tennessee air was thick with summer heat, but I didn't feel it. I remember standing under the old magnolia tree, the scent of blossoms heavy and bittersweet. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's investment. I was just me, Judith. Patricia, my attorney, joined me, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. "You did good," she said quietly. I turned to her. "He's not done," I whispered. "Men like Bradley never walk away quietly." She gave a small smile. "Then we'll make sure he can't make any more noise." She was right. Because in the weeks that followed, the man who'd once boasted about taking half my empire went to war, a messy public self-destructive war. He filed appeal after appeal, each one weaker than the last. He called reporters crying about betrayal and a vindictive wife. He even tried to leak my personal emails, forgetting that those emails were the ones I'd written to his mistress, thanking her for sending me screenshots of their affair. Yes, there had been another woman, several actually. But the worst betrayal wasn't his cheating. It was the way he used my love as a ladder. Every "I love you" had been a step toward my inheritance. Every kiss had been a calculation. And every gift I gave, every vacation, every promotion I helped him get had only taught him one lesson: that I was easy to manipulate. He forgot one thing. I may be gentle, but I am not weak. I kept quiet while he burned himself in public. I didn't give statements, didn't respond to interviews, didn't explain, because sometimes silence is the most devastating answer. I went back to my grandmother's house, the one he'd tried to claim as ours. It was just as she'd left it: lace curtains, photographs in golden frames, the faint smell of old lavender and books. I walked through the rooms that raised me, touching the edges of her desk, the old sewing box she kept under the window. And then I found the letter. It was in her handwriting, that neat, looping cursive that looked like it belonged to another time. Judith, it began, you've always been too kind for this world. Kindness is a beautiful thing until it becomes a weapon used against you. One day you'll have to decide whether to stay kind or stay whole. When that day comes, choose yourself. I read those words again and again until they blurred through my tears. She must have known, somehow even before I did. People often assume revenge is loud. They imagine shouting, slamming doors, broken glass. But real revenge, the kind that heals you, is quiet. It's walking away from someone who thought you'd never survive without them and proving every single day that you did. Still, there were moments when I almost gave in to bitterness. When the tabloids called me the Ice Queen of Franklin County, I almost wrote a statement defending myself. When Bradley's new girlfriend posted about moving on from toxic women, I almost responded. But then I'd remember my grandmother's words, choose yourself. So I stayed silent, and slowly the noise faded. A month later, Patricia invited me to lunch at a small cafe near the courthouse. She'd been my lawyer for years, but that day she spoke more like a friend. He's broke, she said over her cup of tea. Sold the car, the condo, even tried to pawn his Rolex. I looked up from my salad. He'll blame me forever. Let him, she said with a shrug. He was never fighting for you, just for access to your world. I thought about that for a long time after she left. Bradley had wanted my life, but he'd never wanted me. That realization was the hardest truth of all. Because I had loved him genuinely, foolishly, completely. And now that love was a scar, healed but visible, reminding me how easily we mistake charm for sincerity. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the court. The final appeal was denied. Bradley was ordered to pay my legal fees. It was over, truly over this time. I sat on my porch that evening watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. The magnolia tree outside the courthouse had been in full bloom that day, too. It made me think about how some things survive every season, storms, heat, neglect, and still find a way to blossom again. Maybe I could too. Months passed. I rebuilt my life quietly. I took over a mentorship program for women starting businesses, using part of my inheritance to fund scholarships. Every time I spoke to a young woman about financial independence, I'd think of Bradley, of how close I came to losing everything, because I confused love with loyalty. Sometimes I'd drive past the courthouse just to remind myself of that day. Not out of spite, but gratitude. Because it was there, in that cold courtroom, that I stopped being afraid of being alone. I used to think love was supposed to complete me. Now I know love isn't about completion, it's about companionship. And the moment it turns into competition, it stops being love. But the story didn't end there. Because one evening, months later, I got a call that made every memory of him come rushing back. It was from Patricia. Judith, she said, her voice oddly calm, you might want to see this. She sent me a link to a news article. There he was, Bradley Crawford, being escorted by federal agents. The headline read, local businessman arrested for fraud and forgery. Apparently, he'd forged investment documents to cover his debts. The same arrogance that made him think he could outsmart me had finally caught up with him. I stared at his mugshot for a long time. His eyes looked hollow. The charm was gone. The man who once thought he could own everything now owned nothing, not even his freedom. I didn't feel joy. I didn't even feel anger. I just whispered to myself, karma never rushes, but she never forgets. That night, I stood in front of my grandmother's portrait, the same woman who had taught me strength wrapped in grace. I chose myself, Grandma, I said softly, just like you told me to. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind that's loud or triumphant, but the quiet kind that settles deep inside your bones. The weeks after Bradley's arrest passed like a dream. I couldn't quite wake from one of those hazy ones where everything looks the same, but something deep in the air has changed. Everywhere I went, people looked at me differently. Some with pity, some with awe, and a few mostly women with quiet understanding. They didn't need to say it out loud. I could see it in their eyes. They knew what it meant to have been betrayed and to have survived it. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but mostly I felt empty. It's strange revenge gives you back your dignity, but not your innocence. Once you've seen the darkness in someone you loved, you never look at light the same way again. I started going back to my grandmother's office building, the one she'd left me when she passed. It had been vacant for years, filled with dust and echoes of her laughter. When I unlocked the door that first morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, illuminating floating dust like tiny pieces of memory suspended in air. I spent the entire day cleaning, every drawer, every shelf, every framed photo. In the bottom drawer of her desk, I found an old notebook bound in worn leather. On the first page in her looping handwriting were the words, "Every woman must learn the art of survival without losing the heart to care." I closed the book and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood her. That same week I received a letter. No return address, just my name written in blocky, familiar handwriting. Bradley. I hesitated before opening it. The last thing I wanted was another dose of his poison. But curiosity or maybe closure got the better of me. Inside was a single page. Judith. I know you hate me. You have every reason to. I ruined us. I ruined myself. I was stupid, greedy, desperate. But I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to love you without wanting what you had. I thought I could catch up to you. I thought if I had your success, your confidence, your world, I'd finally feel enough. I was wrong. I'm sorry. There was no signature, just that single pathetic word at the end. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the mantel. Forgiveness didn't come. But pity did, and somehow that felt like progress. The world soon forgot about him. Fraud cases came and went, new scandals replaced old ones. Bradley became just another headline that faded from memory. But I never forgot. Not because of what he did, but because of what I became after. I started giving talks at women's business conferences. Not about revenge or divorce, but about resilience. About learning where your worth actually comes from. I told them what I wish someone had told me. Never apologize for being successful, and never trust anyone who makes you feel guilty for it. One evening, after one of those events, a young woman came up to me in tears. She said her fiancé had asked her to merge their finances, even though she was the one paying all the bills. "What should I do?" she asked. I smiled gently and said, "Protect yourself, not because you don't trust him, but because you love yourself." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, I realized what my grandmother's legacy truly was. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the company. It was strength passed down through lessons, through pain, through women who refused to stay broken. A few months later, I got a call from Patricia. She had that tone she used when she was half amused, half irritated. "You'll want to hear this," she said. "Bradley's sentencing was today." I didn't ask for details, but she told me anyway. 18 months in federal prison, minimum security, he cried in court. I sat in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to her voice fade in and out. Somewhere deep down, a younger version of me, the version that used to believe in happy endings, mourned him. Not the man he became, but the illusion I once loved. "Do you want to make a statement?" Patricia asked gently. I thought for a long time before answering. No, let the silence be my statement. That night, I couldn't sleep. I made tea, sat by the window, and stared at the city lights flickering in the distance. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love could save anyone. And then I thought about the woman I had become, the one who understood that love can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. At some point, I opened the drawer and took out his letter again. I read the words one last time, and then I lit a match. The flame devoured the page, quickly curling the edges into black lace before turning it all to ash. When the fire went out, I felt lighter. Not happier, just freer. It was the last thing of him I'd ever keep. Months later, on a rainy afternoon, I walked back into the courtroom. Not as a plaintiff, not as a victim, but as a guest speaker for a law student's ethics seminar. Judge Richardson was there, the same sharp eyes and calm poise as always. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "Mrs. Crawford," she said, I hear you're quite the mentor these days. Trying to be, I replied. Before I left, she stopped me. You know, she said quietly, I've presided over hundreds of divorce cases. But yours was the only one that ended with laughter. I smiled. Then I suppose that's how justice sounds. That evening, I drove home in the rain, the windshield wipers keeping rhythm with the thunder outside. The road was dark, but it didn't scare me anymore. I used to fear endings, now I understood that some endings are simply new beginnings written in disguise. When I got home, I opened the door to the quiet hum of my empty house. And for the first time, it didn't feel empty at all. I walked through the hallway past the portraits, the soft lamp glow, the quiet strength of the life I had rebuilt. And I whispered to my grandmother, to myself, to every woman who's ever been underestimated. We survive, we learn, we rise. Because in the end, this was never just a story about betrayal. It was about reclamation. It was about remembering that sometimes the envelope we hand over to the judge isn't just evidence, it's freedom folded in paper. And when justice laughs, it's not mockery, it's relief. If my story touched your heart, if it reminded you that no one can steal your worth, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you've ever faced betrayal and found your strength again. Because the world needs more voices that refuse to stay silent.